Conversations over dinner with Alicia. Hey, with Alicia. That's right. Hey, welcome back to Authentic Conversations Over Dinner. I am your host, Alicia Green. I am a certified life coach as well as a grief mentor. And I'm just a woman that knows what it feels like to have to rebuild your identity from the ground up. And I am here to serve you. So stay tuned for our next episode. Hey, y'all, and welcome back. On today's episode, I am going to be doing a solo episode. So it's just going to be you and I, where I ask myself some questions that are heartfelt. These questions are going to deal with my grief journey, my healing journey, as well as some tools and things that I have used that have helped me to get through my journey. So we're going to go ahead and get into the first question. And also, if you would like to take notes, if you need to grab a journal or anything that you feel will help you, go ahead and do it. And let's get into this episode. So, question one is, what's one book that shifted my relationship with God? So I think all believers know this, right? But just for anybody that is just going through their grief journey that has struggled, one of the books that has really carried me through is the Bible. Okay. I have a couple of Bibles, but this Bible is special to me because it belonged to my grandfather. And when my dad passed away, of course, we, took most of his belongings, but this is something that he had with him. And so this is the Holy Bible, which has helped me to get through my grief journey and just, finding really good scriptures, Bible verses to hold on to. And actually, I wanted to read one of the verses that have really helped me through. And okay. So one of the Bible verses that I have is from Joel 2, verse 25. And that is, the Lord says, I will give you back what you lost to the swarming locust, the hopping locust, the stripping locust, and the cutting locust. It was I who sent this great destroying army against you. And so I chose this particular verse because I feel like a lot of things, was taken away from me in these past 5 years. And, it almost felt like God, like, what's going on? And, sometimes, I felt like, would I ever get out of this place of depression, out of grief? And so, one of the things I know about the Holy Bible is that the word is alive. Okay. So, every word that's in the Bible is alive and it will manifest. It just depends on your faith level because sometimes things do happen in your life, but because of your faith, you sometimes don't really notice it or you sometimes miss it. So I would say within these past few months, I have really just been standing on God's word and his promises. And that is one of many verses, but I just wanted to share that with you because, dealing with grief and loss, that has really kept me through. And also, asking God to strengthen my faith too, which brings me to another verse because I have all these little verses here. Yeah. So if you are someone that struggles with your verse, this is another one coming from Matthew 21:22, which reads, and whatever you ask in prayer, you will receive if you have faith. And I know some of you, like me, struggle with faith, right? Because I'm like, what? But it also says, because there's always another verse that backs up the verse, right? So it brought me to Matthew 17:20, which says, he replied, because you have little faith, truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. So when I sort of waver with my faith, I always go back to that scripture, but I call it my mustard seed faith. So whenever I'm in my prayer or my devotion and I'm praying for something, I'm asking God for breakthrough. I'm asking God for healing, deliverance. I'm asking for clarity. I always tell God, even with my little mustard seed faith, God, I know that you will not return to me anything void, right? Because your word is true and it is living. So whenever you're in your prayer and petition, I feel those are some really good verses that have helped me. And I've also seen things come to fruition and manifest in my life. So, yeah. And another book, okay, so I got off into the Bible and I started reading scripture, but another book that has helped me get through is Battlefield of the Mind. And I actually don't have the hardcover, I don't have the actual book, but I listened to her audio and that has really helped me too. Battlefield of the Mind really touches on your mindset as a believer or even an unbeliever, someone that is struggling with addiction, struggling with forgiveness, struggling with identity. I mean, Joyce Myers pretty much touches on all of that. And she reminds us that the battle is really in our mindset. So even if things are happening, right, you're dealing with spiritual warfare, you're dealing with things that are happening all around you. You're dealing with people, you're dealing with places, you're dealing with situations. Her book, Battlefield of the Mind, reminds us that we have the power to choose how we think, right? We actually have the power to control what we think. Based on what we're feeding our minds, what we're feeding our brains. And so I love that book because it's that reminder, sometimes you find yourself falling off the deep end. And so I've read that book several times. I'm probably going to go back to it again. But again, that is one of my favorite books by Joyce Myers, Battlefield of the Mind. Um, yeah. And she also has, she refers to the Bible a lot too. I love books that also align to biblical principles and practices. So there you have it. My next question is, how did you process the loss of both my parents, my mother and father? So, my mother passed away first back in 2019. She had a debilitating major stroke. She did have many strokes for years, but the last stroke that she had was the one that completely debilitated her and caused her to be bedridden for 8 years. And so it was a very slow process for my mother, just seeing a decline in her body, her physical abilities, and just going through that whole process. Of seeing my mother in that condition and being her caregiver, my dad as well. And then we also had Mrs. Ramos. Shout out to Mrs. Ramos, who also was my mother's caregiver that was there sometimes 24 hours a day for months. And it was not an easy job because my mother couldn't do anything for herself. She couldn't feed herself. She couldn't change herself. And so that alone was a grieving process, right? Because you go from your mother being normal where you can talk and have a conversation, where she can walk around, where she's mobile, she has um mobility in her hands, her feet, she can talk, she can, to not being able to do any of those things. And for 8 years that was very tough. So I can say that that was the beginning of my grief journey. I didn't realize that that was grief, but looking at it hindsight, it was a form of grief. And I didn't really process that right away, to be honest. And so my mom passed away in 2019, and then a few years later, my dad passed away in 2023, and my dad passed away of stomach cancer. He had stage 4 stomach cancer, and his process was quick. he found out that he had stage 4 cancer in January of 2023, and then he passed away in July of 2023. So it went from one extreme to another. My mother, her process took 8 years. My dad's took 6 months. And so both extreme, both very painful. I will say with my mother, I think I took that the hardest. And I think it's because I didn't experience that before. I never experienced the loss of a parent. So losing my mother was really hard for me. And I didn't do too well with that. I was angry, I was upset and, lashing out. I told this story many times, but, just, anybody that's going through that, where I lashed out, I was angry at everyone. I felt like no one was there. I blamed everybody. And, I just didn't know how to process grief correctly. And then when my dad passed away, I found myself going back because I did heal a little bit from my mother passing, but then my dad passes away. And then that's another, punch in the gut. And I found myself going back to that place that I was when my mother passed away. But I realized that I didn't want to go down that same route because it didn't end too well. So I knew that I needed help at that point. And so I sought out help for that. I began looking for help, researching. I went to therapy and then, they recommended Grief Share, but I didn't, I wasn't really paying attention. Grief Share is like a group social gathering, I guess you could say, where you are around other people that are grieving and mourning. And at first I was like, I don't know if I want to do that. But what really convinced me to do it is because I wasn't really getting better because I was still dealing with grief by myself. Even though I was going to therapy, I was still, doing it by myself. I wasn't really around other people that I could share my experience, share my journey with. And so I still wasn't really processing it in a healthy way. And so I started to attend this church and they brought up Grief Share again. And it was their very first time doing the Grief Share. And the very first day, the very first start day of the Grief Share was on my mother's birthday. And so I was like, that's too coincidental. So I said, this is God's way of saying, here, you've been praying for help, here you go. So it was an answer to my prayers. And I feel like that was very um helpful to my grief journey is just going to grief share, being around others that have lost a loved one, and just us sharing our stories. And then I got a lot of revelation, and I just learned a lot. I realized that a lot of how I was feeling and a lot of my negative behaviors was not uncommon for someone that was grieving. And so it just really helped me to process and to be more light with myself and not so critical, and understanding that we all have different ways of grieving. And it taught me a healthier way of dealing with my grief journey. So again, anybody that is, grieving, and it's a difficult time for you, there are resources out there. And one good, great, wonderful resource is Grief Share. So find you a local Grief Share. Churches usually host these grief shares. So you can look it up. They have a website, griefshare.com, I believe, or griefshare.org. I should have had that. Look it up, Google it, and find a local church and um, go on with the journey and see if it helps you with your grief journey. But I can guarantee you it will. And they also have it available online too. So I know some people don't really like being around a lot of people like that. So they do offer the services online where you can do it on your own. But I highly recommend finding a community, because where two or three are gathered, God is in the midst, right? And it says two are better than one, because you have someone to carry you, to hold you, right? To stand in agreement, stand in the gap where you are weak. So it's always good to be in community. But if you are not ready, I trust me, I understand, because I had to go through that journey too, until I realized that being in community is always better. So yeah, I recommend that. The next question I have for myself is, um, what did losing my childhood home in the Eaton fires teach me, y'all? So this was another loss that, completely devastated me. So it's like when you think you getting over one thing, then something else happens, right? And so um that I mean, that is a whole nother loss. It's like losing both your parents, and now you lost your childhood home, you lost your neighborhood, you lost the stores that you used to go to, your neighbors, your favorite ice cream parlor, your favorite park, just everything just gone, right? In a day, in an evening, actually. The fires happened January 7th. And that was completely devastating for me. And it did set me back. It set me back on my grief journey because now, not only am I still processing the loss of my parents, I'm also processing the loss of my neighborhood where I grew up. And so, of course, that brought me to my knees. But luckily, at this point, I was in community with others who have lost their homes and that was going through the same exact loss. And so that was very helpful in a lot of ways because I was able to grieve with others who were grieving, and we were able to be that shoulder for one another, and we were able to be of service to one another and lifting one another up, and and celebrating each other's wins. When you would hear another person who lost their home, how miracles was happening for them, how doors was opening and blessings flowed. And so I could say that that's one thing that definitely helped me with processing grief. And it also taught me that people care. People truly care if you reach out and if you communicate and talk to people and you ask for help. There are more people willing to help than they're not. And I used to have a mindset of I don't want to bother people. Everybody going through something, they got their issues. We got our issues. But that is a selfish way of thinking and somewhat prideful. And I think that you may not realize that you're being prideful, and it's not necessarily intentional where you're being prideful. It could be based on, childhood wounds, which I realized too, that I, you know, felt like I was a burden sometimes because of some of the trauma and the things that I went through and some of the lies that were spoken over me. And so I had to come out of agreement with a lot of lies and a lot of things that were spoken over me and realize that I have more people in my corner than I realize, than I even know. And all I have to do is open my mouth and ask for help. And so I will say that is one of the um, major things that I learned with losing my home and losing my community is I learned community. I learned that there are people, there are places, there are circumstances that can help you by you just opening your mouth, speaking, and asking for help. So, my takeaway is don't be afraid to ask for help. There are people out there that are for you. Pray to God, ask God for guidance, ask Him to order your steps, ask Him to send the right people that are willing to help, that are willing to bless you, so that in return, you can be a blessing because that is what life is all about. We are here for one another. All right. And what else did I have? Oh, I have question 4. Question 4 is, what daily practices keep me grounded when grief resurfaces? So I always tell people that grief is not just a straight line. It's not a you get from point A to point Z. I mean, you go to point A to point B, then you go back to point A, then you go to C, then you go to back to A, then you go to G, and then you go back to C. And so it's all over the place, right? I mean, there is no one way to grieve. So when I find myself going back into that mindset, or when something triggers, like holidays can be triggering for some, birthdays can be triggering. The scent, smelling something, a familiar scent can be triggering. Going to a place, a familiar place, or going back and to your childhood home or your neighborhood. There are so many triggers, and so I've learned to acknowledge the trigger. Instead of burying it, I've learned to really think about what I'm thinking about. To not just go around just thinking blindly, just really being mindful of what I'm thinking about and saying, you know what, I'm feeling this anxiety. I'm feeling this knot in my stomach. I'm feeling a little wheezy because it's my mother's birthday, or it's my dad's it's a holiday or whatever, and it reminds me of the times that we spent together. And so what I do is I journal. That is one of my favorite things that I do. And if you do go to grief share, they offer a journal. I mean, it's an additional cost, but it's a really good tool for grief share because it asks you specific questions. It shares other people who have lost a loved one. It shares their scenario and asks you, like, what would you do in this situation? It has Bible verses. So it's a really good tool to use for grief. Or you can get your own journal. I have so many journals. I mean, I'm just going to show y'all. I got a journal. I mean, so you can, and I have a few other journals all over, but you can just get you a journal and just write about how you're feeling, be honest about it, be raw, like curse, say what you need to say, cry, cry, but with your words. I think is so helpful. So journaling is one thing that I have used. Another thing that I use is movement. So I really enjoy being in the outdoors. And I don't mean exercising. I just mean you can, because I do sometimes go on my power walks. I go on my morning walks, which is really helpful. But just going outside and breathing in the fresh air and walking around, looking at nature, listening to nature, smelling it, and just I feel like there's just so much healing in God's beauty, which He created. He created heaven and earth, and so just experiencing what God has created has definitely helped me in my healing journey. I love going to the beach. That's another favorite thing I like doing. I love hiking. Um, I used to hike a lot more. I will say I kind of fell off from hiking, but I'm gonna start getting back to that. But I love my nature walks. I love walking around the lake. I love just being outside in nature. Okay. I also love yoga. Yoga is another thing that I do that has been helpful too. What else? Going to the gym. The gym really isn't my thing per se, but it's something that is really good to do to move your body. So getting in the gym, lifting weights, working on your cardio. Those are great ways to help you because you're allowing your your body to just release. You're releasing things with sweat, right? You're getting your endorphins moving, and you're just you're not stuck. And oh, Zumba is also another thing I enjoy doing too. So just moving your body is so important. What else did I say here? And there are, being in community as well, surrounding yourself around like-minded people, trusted people, friends, family, therapy, community, whoever, whatever. Just make sure that you're not going through this process alone. There is help out there. There's help online. There's help in person. So those are all the things that have helped me in my grief journey. And I hope that that will also help you too if you are currently going through yours and knowing that you're not alone. Um, so, yeah, so I would ask you for that particular takeaway, what's daily rhythm you can add to your life to help you heal? Start small, just start with one thing. If it's just journaling, one day, or if it's like, today I'm gonna get up and go for a walk. Whatever it is, I always tell people baby steps. Baby steps. If it was you just getting out of the bed in the morning, come on. Like you've been in bed probably for a few days and just you getting up and getting out of the bed and making your bed up, though, that to me is huge, right? Because you're doing something, you're moving forward, whatever you're moving forward looks like. And I will say what I've learned about my grief journey is to not compare myself to anybody else, because when you start comparing yourself to other people, it's not really healthy, because now you're putting too much pressure on yourself. You're putting too much pressure on keeping up with other people, and really you don't really know what that person is going through. And so I just learned to just focus on my journey, focus on what God is doing in me, and just doing my best to show up the best way that I can, and deciding that I'm not going to stay stuck. I'm going to move forward, whatever that forward looks like. So that is all I have for today's episode. I hope that this Q&A has been beneficial to you. And please don't forget to like, to comment, to share, and let me know what you think. And I will see you on the next episode. Take care. Bye.